A storm howled outside the cabin, rattling the shutters like angry fists. Inside, the fire had nearly died out, but her hands were warm, covered in blood. Not hers. A stranger lay on the floor, barely breathing, soaked and shivering. She hadn't meant to save him. She wasn't even sure who he was. But by morning, the entire town would be at her doorstep, whispering her name and judging her silence. The scent of iron, smoke, and pine clung to the walls. She'd just saved his life. So why was she suddenly being forced to become his wife? The wind never truly stopped in Dry Hollow. It only paused to catch its breath. Out here, in a place where mercy was scarcer than rain, every man, woman, and child had a story carved into their skin by the land itself. But none wore it quite like Alara Vane. She lived alone in a weather-worn cabin tucked deep in the canyons, hidden by crooked pines and winding stone. Her nearest neighbor was a 2-day ride, and that was just how she liked it. The people of Dry Hollow had long since stopped asking questions about the quiet woman who spoke to no one, traded only when necessary, and returned to her solitude like a wounded wolf crawling back to its den. Alara was not born of the desert, though she had been shaped by it. Her eyes, storm gray, had seen too much. Her hands, though delicate in form, wore faint scars that no homestead work could explain. And beneath the high collar of her blouse, hidden from every curious eye, was a deeper mark, a burn across her shoulder, old but angry, the kind left by branding iron or betrayal. Most days began the same. She woke before dawn, stoked the fire, fetched water, and checked the traps laid by the ravine. She moved through her chores with practiced silence, her mind always somewhere else, far away in a past she never spoke of. Some said she was a widow. Others whispered darker things, that she'd once been part of the Black Ridge Raiders, a violent tribe of outlaws who disappeared into the canyons after the government purge. Alara never confirmed or denied anything. Silence was safer than truth in Dry Hollow. The town, small and sun-scorched, had its own broken edges. The sheriff, Thomas Cade, was a former Union soldier turned drunk lawman. He knew the rules out here. Keep the peace, don't ask too many questions, and don't turn your back on anyone after dark. Then there was May Carter, the blacksmith's wife and town gossip. If anyone knew, or thought they knew, Alara's past, it was May. She watched Alara with the sharpness of a hawk, waiting for her to slip, to bleed, to break. But Alara hadn't broken. Not yet. A few children in town called her the Canyon Witch, though they'd never seen her cast a spell. It was just a name born from fear and mystery. Still, Alara didn't mind. Fear kept people away, and distance kept her safe. The territory itself was no friend. To the north, the Ash Vale, tribes were growing restless after their lands had been carved up for mining contracts. To the west, the Stagbone Riders, a vicious gang of deserters and mercenaries, had taken up residence in the cliffs. No one ventured out alone unless they had a death wish or a secret. It was late autumn when the storm came. Alara had noticed the signs: birds flying low, animals disappearing from sight, and a pressure in the air that made her bones ache. She'd secured the shutters, laid extra wood near the fire, and prepared to wait it out. But the night brought something the desert never had before: a man. He was barely alive when she found him, collapsed near the edge of her property, his coat torn and soaked, his face covered in bruises and blood. A broken rifle hung loosely over his shoulder. He had no name, no badge, no words, just pain. And in the dim light of her lantern, she saw something else, a seal branded into the inside of his wrist. She recognized it immediately. It was the mark of the Federal Scout Corps, a group disbanded years ago after their betrayal in the Ember Valley Massacre. They weren't supposed to exist anymore. Not officially. Alara should have left him there. She should have let the cold finish what his enemies had started. But something inside her stirred, something she thought she buried years ago. So, against every survival instinct, she dragged him inside, laid him by the fire, and treated his wounds. She never expected what would come next. By morning, the law would come knocking, and the man she saved wouldn't be a stranger much longer. Alara barely slept that night. The stranger's fever had climbed, and though she'd done her best to cool him with cloth and creek water, his body writhed against the blankets, muttering fragments of words she didn't understand. Names, coordinates, warnings, secrets. By dawn, he was silent. She sat near the fire, staring at him, torn between throwing him back into the storm or keeping him alive long enough to learn why he had the mark. That seal, it didn't belong to just anyone. The Federal Scout Corps were ghosts, and the few who had survived Ember Valley had either gone into hiding or switched sides. She was still thinking it through when the knock came. Not the polite kind. The kind that rattled the entire cabin door. 3 heavy bangs. A pause. Then another 3. Her blood ran cold. Only one man knocked like that. Marshal Uracrete. She hadn't seen him in 5 years, but she knew his rhythm, calculated and cold. He wasn't a man. He was a noose with a badge. Tall, sharp-eyed, and always dressed in black with silver buttons polished to a mirror shine. Creed was the government's hound, sent to clean up loose ends and silence what history tried to forget. And if he was here, that meant they knew. Alara stood slowly, hand on the small revolver hidden behind her pantry door. She cracked the window open just enough to peek through. There he was, on horseback, flanked by 2 deputies. Men she didn't recognize. The marshal hadn't aged a day. Still pristine. Still dangerous. Alara Vane, he called out, voice as smooth as oil on water. You've got something that belongs to the state. She didn't reply. Her mind raced. She hadn't left the cabin in weeks, hadn't even gone to the trading post. How did they know? How did he know? Open this door, or we'll tear it off the hinges, Creed warned, tipping his hat. And I'd rather not disturb your little patient while he's resting. He knew. She opened the door just a crack. Creed smiled like a man visiting an old friend. Didn't expect to find you out here, Alara. You were supposed to be gone. Dead, even. I was gone, she said, steel in her voice. He leaned closer, lowering his tone. Then why'd you bring him inside? You could have let the desert swallow him like it swallows everything else. But you didn't. Which means you still care. I don't, she snapped. He was bleeding. That's all. You always were a terrible liar. He motioned to his deputies, then stepped back. Here's the truth. That man inside, he's not just a ghost from the past. He's a courier. And what he's carrying is worth more than gold to a lot of dangerous people. Creed's voice dropped lower. You've got 2 options, Alara. Hand him over, and we forget you were ever part of Ember Valley. Or keep him, and we drag you back in chains. She didn't respond. 1 heartbeat passed. Then another. She slammed the door shut. Gunshots exploded almost immediately. Glass shattered, wood splintered, and her lungs burned as she dove behind the hearth. The deputies had opened fire. Creed didn't care about protocol. He never had. His kind didn't arrest, they erased. But Alara wasn't a helpless woman anymore. Not like she had been all those years ago. She grabbed her revolver, kicked open the side door, and fired 2 quick shots, taking 1 deputy off his horse. The second scrambled back. Creed didn't flinch. You're making this worse than it needs to be, he shouted. I know exactly how bad it's going to get, she yelled back. The injured man inside groaned. His eyes fluttered open for the first time, locking onto Alara. Confused, panicked, but aware. We have to go, she hissed, dragging him up with effort. He was half dead, but still breathing. Can you walk? He nodded weakly. She didn't have time to ask questions. She grabbed her pack, already half-stocked, a survival habit from old days, and threw a blanket over his shoulders. They stumbled out the back, ducking low through the trees as bullets whizzed past. Creed's voice echoed after them. You can run, Alara, but there's no place left to hide. They reached the edge of the ridge before her legs gave way. The man collapsed beside her, coughing blood. But even through the pain, he reached into his coat, pulled out a thin, metal case, and handed it to her. What is this? She asked, breath ragged. Proof, he whispered. They're lying to everyone. The massacre wasn't what they said. You were right to run. Alara opened the case, and her eyes widened in horror. Inside was a map and a list of names. One of them was hers. The wind howled again, louder than before. And somewhere in the distance, Creed was still coming. The map inside the metal case burned in Alara's pocket like a hot coal. They had escaped the cabin, but barely. Her home, the one place she thought would keep her past buried, was now nothing more than smoke and ashes in the distance. Everything she owned, every scrap of her carefully maintained isolation, had been destroyed in a matter of minutes. And now she was on the run again. She led the man. Cashin was the name he finally gave, through a jagged canyon path known only to old scouts and outlaws. The route was treacherous, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. And Alara did. She'd used it once, long ago, when fleeing the massacre that erased her entire unit, and nearly her life. Cashin was weak, but healing. His wounds weren't just physical, though. She saw it in the way he looked at her, like he knew something about her that she hadn't told him. Or maybe remembered something. That was more unsettling. They stopped by a cold stream late in the evening. The sun bled across the sky in molten red, casting shadows long and dangerous. "Why were you really out there?" Alara asked, watching him from across the fire. Cashin hesitated. "I was sent to deliver that case to someone in Blackthorn Ridge. Someone who used to work with the Corps. We knew they were still alive. But I never made it." "Why you?" "Because no one was supposed to know who I was." That answer sat wrong with her. She leaned in. "Then why did you have my name in that case?" Cashin looked her in the eye. "Because you're not who you say you are, either." A silence fell between them. Tense. Heavy. She stood and walked to the edge of the clearing, hiding the tremble in her fingers. He didn't know everything. He couldn't. But he knew enough to be dangerous. By the second night, the journey grew harder. They traveled only at dusk or before sunrise, cutting across dry riverbeds and crumbling mountain passes. At one point, they passed a burned-out village, silent and still, with no graves. Just empty shoes and broken doors. Alara knew what had happened there. Creed had passed through. At the third campsite, Alara spotted someone watching them. A shadow moved along the ridge, just beyond the firelight. She didn't hesitate. Gun drawn, she fired a warning shot into the sky. The figure stepped forward, hands up. It was a woman. Rough clothes, worn boots, and a tattoo Alara recognized. A broken wheel beneath a crescent moon, symbol of the old resistance cells from the Northern Territories. Her name was Mira, and she claimed she was just a wanderer. But Alara didn't trust wanderers, especially not ones with resistance ink burned into their forearms. Still, Mira helped them, brought them water, offered safer routes, and even shared intel. According to her, Creed wasn't the only one after Cashin. A splinter group called the White Band, former federal assassins turned mercs, had been tipped off about the contents of the metal case. "They want to erase the names," Mira said. "If those names get out, half the territory governors fall. It's not just soldiers on that list. There are judges, businessmen, warlords, and spies. That's why you're both targets now." Alara didn't want to believe her. But she knew the game. Power always hunted the truth with a loaded gun. Tensions rose. Alara and Mira butted heads constantly. Mira pushed for bold moves, while Alara preferred silent survival. Cashin, meanwhile, kept asking questions about the old days, about Ember Valley, about the scars on Alara's back. He never said it, but Alara could feel it. He knew she'd once worn a badge. He just didn't know which side she'd been on when things went wrong. Then came the betrayal. It was just past dawn when Alara woke to the sound of hooves. Cashin and Mira were gone. The case was missing, and fresh tracks led north. At first, she thought they had left her behind. But as she followed the trail, she found signs of a struggle, broken branches, blood, a spent bullet casing. It hadn't been a betrayal. It had been an ambush. The White Band had found them. Alara's heart pounded. She moved faster, tracking them through a gulch where shadows clung to the rock. The further she followed, the more bodies she found. One of Myra's knives, stained red. A familiar jacket torn and bloodied. But it wasn't Cashin's. It was Myra's. Alara crouched beside the body. Mira had fought hard, but not hard enough. The list was gone. Cashin was gone. And now Alara was alone again. For 2 days, she chased the trail with a fury she hadn't felt in years. She crossed into outlaw territory, where no flags flew and no laws held. She paid a smuggler with the last gold coin she had for information. He told her what she feared. Cashin had been taken east, toward the Iron Cross mines. The white band was holed up there now, under Creed's control. The mines were supposed to be closed, but they were very much alive, turning prisoners into labor, silence into power. And if Creed had Cashin, then it wasn't just about secrets anymore. It was about erasure. Alara stood at the edge of the mesa. The mines below her bathed in dusklight. Smoke rose in slow spirals from the chimneys. Guards paced the fence lines. And deep inside, somewhere in the dark, was a man who might still trust her, and the list that could destroy everything the territory had built on lies. She had no plan, no backup, just a single revolver, a burned name, and a past that refused to stay buried. And yet, for the first time in years, Alara Vane wasn't running anymore. She was going in, to finish what had started in Ember Valley. The wind howled through the Iron Cross mines, sweeping dust through the shattered windows and steel beams like the ghost of old battles. Alara moved in silence, gun in hand, heart tight in her chest. Every corridor echoed with creaks and whispers. She'd made it inside, but something was wrong. Too quiet, too easy. She passed a guard slumped against the wall, a bullet in his chest. His mouth was open in a scream he never finished. Blood dried on his vest. The closer she got to the holding cells, the heavier the air became. Then she saw him, Cashin, tied to a rusted chair, bruised, bloodied, but alive. Alara, he whispered hoarsely. You shouldn't be here. She rushed to him, blade out, cutting his bonds. I tracked you across 2 canyons, fought 3 mercs, and broke into a war zone to hear you say that. But Cashin didn't look relieved. He looked guilty. Alara, he said, barely able to meet her eyes. I didn't tell you everything. Because if I had, you wouldn't have saved me. She froze. I didn't crash near your cabin by accident. The room swayed. What are you talking about? She demanded, stepping back. I was sent to find you. Not the list. You. She stared at him, stunned. Cashin's voice was flat, resigned. You're not just some ghost living off-grid. You're Alara Vane, the last active name from Ember Valley. The only survivor of the failed Blackthorn Rebellion. The Corps wants you erased, not hidden. Her mouth went dry. You were bait. I was the trap. Silence. Pure and deafening. She backed away slowly. All the kindness, the tenderness, the stolen glances by the fire, it was all a lie? No, he said quickly. That part wasn't. I didn't expect to care. I didn't expect you. I should kill you, she said, voice shaking. I know. And then the alarm blared. Red lights pulsed from the ceiling. Doors slammed shut. Shouts erupted through the hallway. They're coming, Cashin rasped. You have to go. I'm not leaving you now, Alara snapped. But footsteps pounded toward them. Gunfire rang out. And just as she turned to fire back, Creed stepped through the door. Tall, cold, familiar. Alara Vane, he drawled, voice slick like oil. Didn't think I'd see you again after Blackthorn. You're still pretty, even with blood on your hands. Alara raised her gun. Creed grinned. You're surrounded. That trigger won't save you. His men flooded the room. 6, maybe 7. Too many. Cashin struggled to rise, but he was too weak. Alara aimed anyway. She'd been outnumbered before. Then Creed threw something at her feet. A photo. Charred. Faded. Her. In uniform. Standing beside him. The memory slammed into her like a bullet. Years ago. Before the rebellion. Before the betrayal. She wasn't just a survivor of Ember Valley. She had helped start it. Alara staggered back, the truth slicing through her chest. You recruited those people, Creed sneered. You built the cell. And when the feds offered you a deal, you sold them out. The massacre at Ember wasn't just an ambush. It was your call. No, she whispered. That's not how it happened. Cashin stared at her, confused. Is that true? Her hands shook. I gave them a list of targets to protect, not to slaughter. Creed stepped closer. History's written by the ones left breathing, sweetheart. Then he pulled a gun and aimed it at Cashin. You want to save him, Alara? Prove your loyalty. Finish what you started. Shoot him. She froze. Cashin didn't beg. Alara, he whispered. You wanted an impossible choice, Creed said with a smirk. Here it is. Alara's mind spun. Her hands clenched the weapon. She could save Cashin, but doing so would expose the truth. And maybe confirm everything Creed said. Or she could kill him and protect herself. Be the ghost again. Alone. Forgotten. But something snapped in her, something ancient and raw. I'm done running, she said. She raised her gun. Creed smirked. Finally. But she didn't aim at Cashin. She fired at the power box above the doorway. The lights exploded. Sparks flew. Darkness swallowed the room. And then chaos. Alara dove into the shadows, grabbing Cashin, dragging him out as bullets flew and shouts filled the air. As they fled into the tunnels, Creed's voice echoed behind her. You can't hide the truth forever, Alara. It always comes back for blood. Fade out. Cliffhanger. Alara and Cashin vanish into the smoke-filled shafts. But now, everything has changed. She's not just running from her enemies. She's running from her past. And soon, she'll have to face it. Head on. The desert was never quiet after a betrayal. The wind didn't whisper, it screamed. And each gust seemed to carry voices from the past, echoing Alara's name in the dry canyons. She and Cashin moved quickly, zigzagging through narrow gulches, past carcasses of rusted wagons and bones bleached white by years under the sun. Cashin limped beside her, wounded but determined. We need to stop, he said, sweat dripping from his brow. We stop, we die, Alara muttered, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Behind them, Creed's mercenaries had regrouped. They weren't just chasing anymore, they were closing in. But it wasn't just them. Something darker was coming. Something worse. They took shelter that night in the skeletal ruins of an old telegraph station. Barely 4 walls and a collapsed ceiling, but enough to rest. Alara poured water over Cashin's wound. He winced, but didn't flinch. I should have told you from the beginning, he said. You think that's what this is about? She snapped. You being a spy? Cashin looked up, confused. It's not just that, she whispered. It's what you made me remember. Who I was, what I did. He reached for her hand. You're not her anymore. No, she agreed. I'm worse. Because I remember everything. And I still don't know how to fix it. Suddenly, the distant howl of a war horn pierced the night. Cashin tensed. That's not Creed. No, Alara said, already reaching for her gun. That's the Sandhowlers. The Sandhowlers weren't mercs. They weren't bounty hunters. They were something older, remnants of a forgotten tribe burned and broken during the Great Frontier Wars. Survivors twisted by rage. They didn't take prisoners. I traded them maps once, Alara muttered. In another life. Now they want payment. She turned to Cashin. Run if you can. Hide if you can't. If I don't come back, I'm not leaving you. She smiled faintly. That's your second mistake. What followed was fire. The Sandhowlers descended from the cliffs like demons with blades. Alara stood her ground, firing with precision, her face a mask of fury and fear. Cashin tried to cover her flank, dragging his bad leg through dust and broken stone. One by one, the shadows fell, but they kept coming. Then an arrow, from the dark, straight into Cashin's side. He screamed and dropped. Alara turned, rage boiling to the surface. She shot the archer dead and ran to him. No, 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 stay with me, she whispered, pressing her hands to his wound. Blood soaked through her fingers. Cashin coughed. Guess that's my third mistake. Shut up, she snapped. You don't get to die. But even as she said it, she saw his face grow pale. Morning came with silence. The Sandhowlers had vanished, retreating or finished. Alara sat against a boulder, Cashin's head in her lap, his breathing shallow but still there. Somehow he'd held on. But something inside her had shattered. She couldn't run anymore. Not from Creed. Not from her past. Not from the truth. I'm going to end this, she whispered. She left Cashin in the care of an old contact, a smuggler named Wren, who owed her more than one favor. Then she took a horse and rode straight into Redwater, a lawless city carved into the bones of the desert and Creed's current base of operations. It was madness, but it was the only way. She walked through the front gates like a ghost reborn, wrapped in black, eyes burning. The guards recognized her. They didn't try to stop her. They knew better. Creed sat at the heart of it all, in a bar-turned-fortress surrounded by loyal killers. He looked up from his drink as she entered. Well, look who crawled back from the grave. I came to settle something, she said, gun drawn. You gonna shoot me, sweetheart? He mocked. No, she replied. I'm going to expose you. She reached into her coat and threw a bundle of documents onto the table. Official reports, signed statements, stolen logs from Cashin's files, your deals with the Corps, the bribes, the operations you blamed on me. You used Ember Valley to wipe out your competition. I just gave them the names. Creed's smirk faded. Redwater may not care about justice, Alara continued, but they care about power, and they'll kill for the chance to replace you. She walked away, and behind her, she heard the chaos erupt. She didn't look back, because revenge wasn't the goal. Freedom was. Later, as she rode back through the desert, a figure waited beneath the canyon ridge. Cashin, pale, weak, but alive. You're insane, he said, grinning. You married me, remember? She smirked. He stepped forward. Was any of it real? She didn't answer at first. Then she reached for his hand and placed something inside it. The necklace he'd given her, the one she claimed she'd thrown away. Every second, she said. But as the two embraced under the rising sun, a shadow moved behind the rocks. Unseen, watching, and deep in the sand, half buried by wind and time, was a familiar emblem. The Blackthorn seal. Not broken, not burned, still alive. The sun had not yet risen when Alara stood at the edge of Blackthorn Pass. Cashin leaned on her shoulder, still weak from the arrow wound. They had ridden through the night, chasing a name that shouldn't have existed, Gideon Blackthorn. He was supposed to be dead, killed in the purge. But now, the emblem Alara found in the sand, the one she'd buried years ago, had reappeared. Fresh, untouched by time. Cashin's voice broke the silence. You're sure it's him? I know his handwriting, Alara said. He trained me. He raised me. He destroyed everything I believed in. Then let's finish this. No, she said. This, I finish alone. The fortress wasn't stone or steel. It was carved into the mountain itself. Hidden, forgotten, a Blackthorn hideout long believed abandoned. But the fires inside still burned. Alara left Cashin in a crevice outside, gave him a revolver, and kissed his forehead. If I don't come out, I'm coming in. She smirked. You never listen. He smirked back. Neither do you. Inside, the air smelled like dust and blood and rusted metal. Every step echoed with memory. She moved silently through narrow halls, past empty weapon racks and shattered glass displays, relics of the Blackthorn militia. Her breath was slow, focused. Then she found him. Gideon Blackthorn. Older now. Grayer. But his presence hadn't faded. He stood beside a long table filled with old maps, rifles, and blueprints. He didn't look surprised. Alara, he said, like a father greeting a daughter. I knew you'd come home. This was never home, she said, gun raised. He didn't flinch. You were always meant to lead. Even after the Ember Valley massacre. Even after you ran like a coward. I ran because I saw the truth, she growled. You ordered children to burn. You blamed me. They were leverage, Gideon said coldly. Tools. Sacrifices for the bigger picture. Alara's hands trembled. You destroyed my life. I built it, he snapped. And I can rebuild it again. Join me. Kill Creed. Take Redwater. You and I, together, could. She fired. Once. The bullet hit the table an inch from his hand. Gideon flinched. I didn't come to talk. Suddenly, movement. From the shadows, two masked soldiers stepped out, rifles raised. Alara ducked, rolled, and returned fire. One went down. The other hesitated, and she recognized his eyes. Kale, her brother. Long thought dead. He hesitated. Alara, he whispered. She froze. Gideon smiled. You see? Even blood returns to me. Kale's hands shook. Alara, I didn't know. He told me you died. That you betrayed us. He lied, she said, tears rising. He's been lying since the beginning. Gideon barked. Kale, shoot her. Kale lowered the rifle and turned it toward Gideon. No, he said. This ends with you. Gideon moved fast, but Alara was faster. 2 shots. Gideon fell to his knees, blood blooming through his chest. He stared at her in disbelief. I made you, he rasped. And I unmade you, she replied. The silence afterward was heavy. Cale collapsed. Alara caught him. "I thought you were dead," she said, crying now. "I almost was," he whispered. "But I followed your name all these years. I knew you couldn't be the villain they said you were." Outside, Cashin appeared, drawn by the gunfire. He helped them out of the fortress. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky gold, Alara turned back to look at the hideout, burning now, collapsing under the weight of its own lies. At the ridge, they buried Gideon's body. Cale said nothing. Cashin reached for Alara's hand. "What now?" he asked. Alara looked at the horizon. For the first time, it didn't feel like a threat. "I don't know," she said. "But for once, I want to choose. Not run. Not fight. Just choose." Cashin smiled. "Then let's start over. Anywhere you want." She nodded. But before they mounted their horses, Cale handed Alara a weathered letter, found among Gideon's things. She opened it. It was addressed to her. From her mother. A mother she thought died when she was a child. The final words stopped her breath. "You were never meant to be a soldier. You were born free. Come find me when you're ready." The wind in the highlands was softer now. 3 weeks had passed since the fortress fell, since Gideon's last breath echoed through the mountain. The fires were gone. The soldiers had scattered. The name Blackthorn, once feared, was now whispered only in memory. Alara stood on the edge of Redwater Ridge, her long coat fluttering in the breeze. Below, wildflowers bloomed through the ash-covered earth, a stubborn sign of life. She hadn't spoken much since that day. Cashin approached quietly behind her, his shoulders still wrapped in cloth. The wound had healed, but the scar would stay, just like the ones no one could see. "You're quiet again," he said. She nodded. "It's been a long war. But it's over now." "No," she said softly. "Just paused." He frowned. "You think someone else will rise?" Alara looked down at the letter again. The one from her mother, still worn from being read and reread. "She's alive, Cashin. My mother. All this time. Gideon kept her from me. Used me. Lied to me. Then let's find her." A small, hesitant smile broke on Alara's lips. "You do that? Leave everything behind?" "I never had anything," he said. "Not until I met you." They shared a quiet moment, the kind only two people who'd nearly died together could truly understand. Cale had stayed behind in Ember Hollow, where the Blackthorn name had left the deepest scars. He'd sworn to rebuild, to make amends for what their family had done. Alara didn't stop him. "You belong here," she told him, "where the healing starts." He hugged her tightly before she left and whispered, "Find her, Elle. And when you do, ask her why she left us. I still need to know." Their journey was not easy. They traveled through broken lands, through ghost towns and outlaw settlements, where children played with broken bullets and elders still spoke of the fires. Along the way, Alara and Cashin grew closer, not just as allies, but as two fractured souls trying to stitch themselves back together. At night, she told him stories of her childhood, of laughter before the fire, of songs her mother used to hum, of dreams buried in the dark. And he told her about his brother, the one who had died during the border wars, the guilt that never left him. They carried each other's pain like old maps, creased and marked, but still leading somewhere. Weeks later, they found her, not in a fortress or a prison, but in a quiet field of lavender, just outside the forgotten town of Mare's Hollow. She was older, frielier, with silver in her hair, but the eyes were the same. "Alara," she whispered when she saw her daughter. The silence that followed could have broken a mountain. No words, just an embrace that stitched years of grief in one breathless moment. They stayed for a while, planted herbs, built a fence, rested, and one morning, as Alara looked out over the valley, her mother handed her something, a worn leather journal. "It's time you knew the full truth," she said. "Gideon didn't just raise you. He hunted you. And your father, your real father, was one of the last peacekeepers, killed by Gideon himself." The world tilted. Alara clutched the journal, hands shaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her mother's eyes welled with tears. "Because he would have killed you too." Alara said nothing, but in her heart, something old and frozen cracked open. She hadn't just survived the Blackthorn legacy. She had outlived it. Epilogue. Months later, Travelers spoke of a woman riding with a man across the silver dust range. They said she had the eyes of a ghost and a mark across her collarbone, the scar of the Blackthorn brand. They said she helped rebuild broken towns, protected wandering orphans, and never stayed long. They called her the Ghost Widow, but no one knew where she came from or where she was going. And when asked, she would only say, "I've got stories still to tell, and shadows left to burn."